All right. So day 3.5. But at night, well, that's when we met our focus group. Uh, our focus group was limited to one guy with his friends, and he was the son of my benefactor's friend, which is basically the ultimate, which is the guy that we met in the morning, and like mad respect, right? Like you meet people every once in a while, and you go like, so glad like I actually got to hang out with them. So yeah, his son, which is a more privileged, had a more privileged upbringing. He didn't have to struggle, and he didn't have to go through all this stuff. And these are basically the young ones that are getting into society, graduating. All of them engineers, architects, right? Because there's architecture engineering apparently, and then there's architecture design or something like this. I don't know. He tried to explain the difference. It didn't really matter. But we wanted to sit with them and discuss some stuff with them. It ended up being just us hanging out and them asking me questions because uh, it only took like an hour of having conversations with them until I basically tapped off their mind, and that they were like they just couldn't answer any more questions. That was the limit of how deep they have seen things, especially how experienced things. But we got a good batch of like friends who are kind of middle class, high class, lower class. Some people actually trying hard, some people just existing, and it's 5 people. Cool. So let me just describe the characters. One was the kid who, the rich father, that just like only cared about looking good and being a businessman, right? And he stated it clearly from the beginning. The other one was his friend, technically his best friend, of which I don't know if they have a rivalry between each other or they just kind of like decided to be friends because everyone else doesn't share their own like I want to say business acumen, but more like the conversations they have are very much like, what are we going to do when it comes to this? What can we do when it comes to this? I have an idea and I don't have an idea. We all have friends like that. We all have friends that are just within that world, while other people tend to discuss different topics, and the majority just discusses politics and drama. Shamefully, that's basically how human beings are kind of like separated. A lot of people really just are not interested in wasting energy, kind of like processing things that they don't really care about. So another one that's very much interested in the art behind architecture. A fourth one is just doing it as he has a different job, which is basically like he works at real estate and he's trying to like finish his degree in order to elevate in life. But that guy, because all he does is study and work, he didn't know how to speak any English at all or Arabic. All he knew how to speak was Kurdish because he basically just he understood the channel he wanted to take and he went full on. He's one of those that works basically after university and basically studies in between, like in the time that he has. So he's probably their friend just because he's as intense as they are when it comes to kind of like how he's looking at life. And a fifth one, which was the more interesting one, was the guy who's actually trying to level up his skills and the engineering that he does, and he's trying to kind of like get internships and all kinds of good stuff pertaining to architecture, so he could actually like level up his skills and be able to kind of get a job better. The last two were on the lower side of the spectrum. One was middle class with both his parents as actual like teachers, and the other two, one's parents was a government worker, but a high level government worker, and the first one was a businessman. So different backgrounds, right? Like from poverty to like middle class, but like weird middle class to like corrupt class and then business class. Ultimately, the conversation I started with like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I figured that's the most neutral thing you can say. But I started with where do you see this country in 10 years? And my thought process was if I ask them where they see the country in 10 years, they could actually give me a clear idea of how positively or negatively they think about it. And after they're done, like they don't have any more things to point at, because the more things they tell me, the more I get to ask questions about what they're speaking about. Then eventually I got to ask them, where do you see yourself given this end result? As in, like, if you want to grow in 10 years, this is the shit that you kind of have to grow in, the good stuff that you have to grow in, the bad stuff you have to grow in. That's your vision of the country, man. So if your vision is a pessimistic one, then basically, how are you evolving into that? And if your vision is a very positive one, how are you evolving into that? Well, the beauty of it is one person truly understood me, and I think that's the artist in him, the creative in him, really wanted to see himself like painting a picture. So at first, when I asked about the country and how it would look like in 10 years, a lot of people were, all of them were just very much, uh, like they already started with, I'm disappointed. And my response was, bro, 10 years. And they go like, yeah, because again, they repeat everything. They reflect on the things that they've experienced on a day-to-day basis that are not working. And amazingly so, human beings take themselves out of the equation. Like, what would happen in 10 years and how would you contribute to it? I think is a very profound question, because it puts you responsible in a way to the outcome, because it's not you. It's there's the whole outcome of your surroundings, whether it is like your community, whether it is your village or county or city or fucking country. Like, it puts you there looking at the end result, and it gives you a choice. Am I going to contribute to this result or something else I want? Because the potentials are endless and we never know, because human nature is a bit more of an inspirational kind. A lot of people would rather follow without them actually saying they would follow, but if you give them a chance to follow something nice, they would gladly just let go of what they're doing and put in the effort. A lot of research has been done on communities, a lot of research has been done on civilizations, and hey man, a lot of research has been done on psychology and how to influence people, manipulate people, all these things. I don't know if it's his name is Jocko or Rocco. It's a guy on YouTube. He once looked at. He once I was asked a question. What's the difference between what you're doing and manipulation? And he basically reflected on it simply. He goes like, it's all about the intention. Because if my intention is positive, then I'm leading you, which is true. But if my intention is negative, then I'm manipulating you. But manipulation comes with a bit of a negative like constraint around it. But that's not necessarily the truth. I could lead you into something negative. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm manipulating you. And maybe I should actually create such a distinction. Maybe I am creating one in my head right now. But if I were to discuss the difference between leadership and manipulation, they both utilize similar techniques. I think manipulation is a prospect of is one of the concepts that leaderships use. The only difference is it's a lot more reliant on the other person's free will, while being actually a manipulative person instead of a leader is kind of removing their free will and kind of creating a different setup in their head. It's a good way to think about it. Let me just write it down. But so while I was actually talking to them, I was like, okay, so you guys are all planning to be leaders in your own fields, or at the very least, you have ambition. So, what could that ambition look like, and what contributes to it? And my goal is versus manipulation. I know this is fun to do. Maybe I should start pausing, but like I really would just want the video to be as organic as possible, so you can see maybe that would actually make you feel less awkward. Because at first, when I started doing these kinds of things, when I'm talking to people and something pops up, I would just go like I'd remember it later, but I completely forget what it is. Because for me, it was embarrassing. So what I started doing was basically calling people afterwards, be like, "What were we talking about?" And they would be like, "Oh, we were discussing this." And as they explained to me, it pops again. I take a note on the phone and I go like, "Thank you very much. I remembered we discussed something nice or something like this." So at one point, I realized that could be an efficient way of approaching it. So I started basically, anytime I'm interested in any conversation, I take my small notebook from my pocket and I put it in front of us, and anytime they say something nice, I kind of like take notes. So I'm not taking notes of what's going on. I'm taking notes of of my thoughts. Always in context, though. I always give myself context in order for me not to kind of like drift on my own, because I want to know how I came to the thoughts before I actually like know how I want to go with it. And I learned that later on again. At first I just write the thought, but it's not enough. Like you kind of have to give some form of context so you can actually reach it again, which enhances your mental like model when it comes to it. And then the more you elaborate on it, you're elaborating from from a trigger that you actually connected to. You're not creating an artificial one. So it becomes more a part of you and a harmonious part of how you are. So leadership versus manipulation, and leadership more plus free will. Final manipulation, no free will. Right? That's basically what we discussed. So I'm going to write it down. I'll circle it in the middle of my book, even though it looks kind of awkward. But all the other stuff that I write, I kind of like write in a more orderly manner. But anytime I'm flipping through copybooks that I have, if I see something like this, I stop because most of the time I forget, and it's perfectly fine. So as I was talking to these guys, I basically started. My goal was to bring them all the way down to the core essence of like what is the lifestyle you're going to have to build towards in order for you to kind of reach your goals. Naturally, I'm talking to people that just graduated. I didn't expect much from them. Not even graduated their last year or third year. There are people that are still kind of like building what they want to do. And in a way, it was more of a consulting thing because that's when, like, after 1 hour, they kind of like all got exhausted from their, they exhausted their mental thoughts. And all was left was for them to kind of ask me questions or explain to me how they actually came up with these conclusions as best as they could. Only two people had deep answers. The rest of the people were very shallow, had very shallow answers. Only two people had actually very deep answers and deep concerns because they sat with themselves and really considered things. They didn't just like find any other idea like any appealing thing to be like worthy of their time. They had only one focus, and that focus was, or two of them. Remember, there was the person that had the basically educators as his parents, and that guy he wanted to build stuff in order for the actual for the country to. He had some pride in his history, and he wanted to contribute to that. And that's where he saw himself 10 years from now. He planned on leaving the country and doing all kinds of stuff. But the other guy had basically a shitty situation of like basically not necessarily a poor household as he explained it. And his main goal was to get out of it. So he chose one thing to kind of like master until he kind of like leaves and like extends himself the other way. And as the more we discuss, the more kind of like they try, the more they kind of like negotiate with themselves of their reasonings. My goal naturally is to see how they look at the house and how they see their house, and if there are anything specific they pick on. If they were to live alone, if they were to kind of like create something within their realm, if they were to take a home or an apartment and design it or build it, what are the things they consider in the apartment? Keep in mind, this is like random stuff and not random stuff. This is more advanced adulting stuff. Hey, dude, like I'm selling tax, and 22-year-olds after 2 3 years they're going to have to start considering these once they start living alone, and that's the my benefactor's thought process. All right. So he's in this project from me as a consultant. He is a stakeholder in this project. He is the owner who needs to get things done. Other stakeholders in this project are basically the management that need to kind of like alternatively change. And at the end of it, I have the end consumer or the client or the people that are actually going to be buying the product. So he understands that from now till 5 years, man, if we start actually promoting ourselves properly, then the people after 5 years will be able to think more quality oriented. And that's his plan, which is brilliant because he's looking into the future. And these guys, I expected them not to understand shit because they still live with their parents. Hey, man, I know I used to live with my parents. And I only had that one friend that he took care of the house, that understood full well when an electrician needs to come, like all these kinds of things, right? But the rest of my friends, we come from a middle class family in Lebanon. The rest, most of my friends had no idea. So so this video reached 15 minutes, dude. But so most of their conversations was a bit more towards how are we looking at the future and how are we going to make our desires happen. And on a global scale, they couldn't give a fuck about this. And I tried my best to bring it down all the way to like, you don't think your lifestyle will contribute to this. Like the lifestyle of a businessman is not drinking every day and hanging out with friends every day and playing games every day. Lifestyle as a businessman is meetings, phone calls, uh, probably coffee shops, or maybe just culturally aware so he would understand trends. All these things are potentially like part of your lifestyle. And they still kind of like they're kids. But we got enough information out of them for me to kind of like look at the country in a more comfortable way because at least I know what I'm working with, or at the very least, I know if somebody was dedicated and or thinking of doing more, that's where they come from, which leaves the people that kind of like are stuck for us to kind of build a storyline that would actually impact their lives. And I would understand where the people that actually are thinking into the future are culturally thinking into the future and where they're coming from. And how I can kind of like contribute to that in order for, at the very least, from a perspective of the factory and the quality they're trying to like provide, there's a lot of decency behind it. There's a lot of like good intention behind it. And there's a lot of, if you're going to buy something, might as well buy a good quality thing, especially if it might affect your health, if it supports your lifestyle, or if at the very least elevates it, right? Like clean water, dude. Clean water is a thing, but most people don't care about it. They just see water. And how do you sell it to them? How do you let them know that this is a necessity in their life? How do you let them know that this is something that they have to consider, but maybe they don't necessarily have to be the ones considering it because there are trusted sources that do? And that was my train of thought, and that's how I wanted to kind of like promote this and understand from their perspective. But it ended up into a 2 hour and a half hangout where they just asked me a lot of questions, and the people that were interested in actually like doing stuff on their own just asked me different questions about how, told me what they're doing and asked me different questions on how I look at it from an outside point of view and what can they do different, and they shared experiences and we just like had a good conversation for an hour and a half, lacking any, like with two people it was like lacking pretentiousness, but with the others it was more like of a battle with like where I see myself and how I want it to be, or else fuck it, like I used to be 20 as well. I am 38 now. But overall, that was day 3.5. Day 4 continues tomorrow.